Yeah, Mike Gillette, talking about the difficulty of doing things differently. Now, this comes from a question that I get quite a bit, which is, hey, Mike, I'm trying to do things better for myself. I'm trying to take better care of myself, whether that has to do with eating or activity levels or something else that's positive for this person. And the question is, hey, Mike, I'm doing these good things. Why don't I feel good yet? And I think the perception is once you start doing good things for yourself, you should feel good. That should be a good feeling process. And the long-term answer is it absolutely is, but it isn't in the short term. And the reason it isn't in the short term is because of how we are wired. And we are wired both physically as well as psychologically in a particular way that does not favor rapid or radical change. We are actually programmed for efficiency, which is why if somebody has become very overweight over time, their initial attempts at losing weight can be frustrating, cannot be as effective as they had hoped, simply because the body is going to hang on to that weight for a while. You have to force significant change upon your physical self because the body is designed to not change quickly. Any rapid change to the body is generally a signal that something is wrong. And when something is wrong, there's some sort of perceived physiological crisis, your body will fight to hang on to what it has. So any change, even if it's positive change in this example, has to be forced upon the body and it has to be sustained. So this also occurs psychologically. And I'll use the example of people who smoke cigarettes. Now, it's very common for people who don't smoke cigarettes to say, well, I've heard that smoking is really hard to quit. In fact, I've heard smoking is like, giving that up is like giving up heroin. It's just so tough. No, not true. I'm not saying it's not difficult. I'm not saying it's not more difficult for other people than other people, because everything varies. But if it was solely about the allure or the power of the drug, the nicotine in this case, then everyone would be able to quit smoking cigarettes immediately, because we have nicotine gum, we have nicotine patches. Those are very prevalent. You see them in any pharmacy. However, people will use those and they won't work. So why is that? Well, because smoking is not just about a physiological phenomenon. It's partly that, but there's something else that goes along. Most people who smoke have a very tightly governed process through which they smoke, and part of that is because it's become so difficult to find any place where you can legally smoke. So other, than home, or in your car, and you'll notice that a lot of people who smoke in cars, have the windows down, or they're always holding the cigarette out the window. It's difficult these days to be a smoker. So as a result, smokers have these very tight rituals. I wake up, I have my first cigarette. I have my first cup of coffee, that's my second cigarette. On my way to work, I can get another cigarette in, possibly two, and then my first coffee break at work is at 10 a.m. That's when I slip outside and I can have maybe 1.5 cigarettes. And they will have it down to this level of specificity. So it's not the nicotine alone that is the issue. When you give up cigarettes, you're giving up all of these rituals, all of these habituated activities that you have sort of built into your day. And when you give up something that is that habituated, it feels wrong. So in addition to whatever difficulty an individual might have with no more nicotine, they're giving up part of themselves. They have built this pattern of activity around themselves and their day, every day, probably over a long period of time. And that's hard to change. And when you stop doing the thing, so if we're stopping cigarettes in this example, we are doing something that feels fundamentally wrong. Because it is. Because your body doesn't know necessarily on some levels that what you're doing is harmful. There's going to be physiological implications, but your mind doesn't necessarily process things that way. You know, this helps me relax. You know, I've always smoked. You know, why is ever, you know, all of these things that, you know, that we tell ourselves about the things we do to make them okay for us to do. So changing, even when it's good change, feels wrong because it feels so different. And the challenge that people typically experience is, you know, let's say we're trying to change our eating patterns. You know, we've been eating a lot of sugar, and we're trying to basically kick sugar out of our life. So for the next you know, however many weeks, we've committed to like one of those sugar fasts for 30 days. Okay, which is a great idea. So, you know, day 1, day 2, not so bad because I'm enthusiastic. You know, I've gotten, you know, motivated. Day 3, day 4, you know, I hear the ice cream truck drive by. I'm watching the same commercials on TV that have always sort of led me, you know, to the refrigerator or to the kitchen cupboard, and I'm really feeling that. And intellectually, I understand that what I'm doing is good for me, but you know, sugar has a strong allure. There's been a lot of recent research lately in terms of how sugar affects your brain chemistry, and it has certain drug-like effects. So it's got some power. So the problem is usually like, you know, say day 8, day 10, day 12, day 14, and the willpower is starting to, you sort of trickle out. And so where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with some important decisions, because this still feels wrong. And it feels wrong because it is so different. And the different feeling, in addition to, I mean, look, certain things in life are inherently pleasurable. Sugar is one of those things. So if you start thinking about, you know, I'm missing out on this, and, you know, this doesn't feel right, it's easy to sort of, you know, fall off the wagon and you know, sort of, you know, medicate yourself with sugar in this case, even though intellectually you know that this isn't helpful, and you'll also probably on some level feel disappointed in yourself emotionally. And, you know, that can set up a very, you know, bumpy up and down trajectory of you know, trying to give the stuff up and then, you know, going back to it, you know, and so on and so forth, which is something that happens with all kinds of things. Hey, I shouldn't gamble so much, but here I am. Oh, I shouldn't go back to that guy because he treats me bad. But here I am back with that guy. Those are so tied into just how we work and the difficulty inherent with doing things differently. So when you get to that point of difficulty, understand that it is completely normal. Where I think most people are tripped up is this idea that I'm doing something that's good for me or better for me, I'm doing the right thing, it should feel good on some level. Now it can, but you have to create that meaning in those moments. You have to look at the struggle as it's happening, and understand that, you know, the struggle is a sign of good things happening. This is my mind sort of, you know, fighting with itself. I am fighting to build new habits, better habits, more productive habits, more positive habits. But it is a fight. You have to force change upon yourself, even if it's a very positive change, because it's not going to feel right. It's going to feel different, and different generally feels wrong. So if you're in the fight right now, the good fight, keep it up. You can do this.